Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. We're back again with King Arthur, Knight's Tale, and this time I want to talk about Sir Kay, a champion that you get very early in the game, and one of the best champions that the game has to offer. Really like this character. Before we get into the abilities, I think I should point you towards its traits first, specifically talented, which means when learning active skills, it's only going to cost Sir Kay 1 skill point as opposed to 2 for everybody else. Meaning, usually when you pick up these major skills that are in squares, it will cost you 2 skill points. As long as it's a skill that he actually has to manually use, it will cost him 1 skill point instead. So you see down here, Whirlwind, for everybody else, it will cost him 2, but in the lower right, you can see it only costs 1 skill point for him. As opposed to damage focus, which is a passive, so it cost him 2 skill points. So it makes it a situation where as long as you're focusing on the abilities he actually has to use, you could be very economical with the points that he has available. All right, now let's go ahead and dive into the abilities. First up is Strike, and you all are already very familiar with it by this point. It's going to do 100% weapon damage to an adjacent enemy. It's going to cause 20% vulnerability on that enemy. You can reduce the cooldowns that you have by 1 turn if you kill with Strike. You can also increase the weapon damage by 15%. And you can cause bleeding on the target that you hit. And I think Sir Kay might be the first character we've went over where I actually recommend that you go ahead and go down the bleeding route, because he gets so many abilities that allow him to cause bleeding. I think there's 4 overall on his kit, and he gets extra bleeding, which is going to add a 50% weapon damage for bleeding effects. While, as I've mentioned before, the undead are immune to both bleeding and poison, and they are heavily prevalent in the game throughout, I'd say, probably up to around level 8. When you get past that point, and especially when you get to the late game, like levels 16 through 20, a lot of those enemies are absolutely susceptible to bleeding. So it's definitely useful to have a bleeding build, just not for that first half of the game. So I feel like it's worth it to go this route with Sir Kay. You just might want to wait a while, leave these empty until you get further in the game when those will really be useful to you. All right, moving on to the next skill. Death Strike deals 170% weapon damage to an adjacent enemy, but with negative 20% armor breaking. So you only want to use this skill on enemies that have no armor, either because they just don't come with armor or you've already stripped all the armor off of them. When you're in those situations, this skill will do a tremendous amount of damage. You can upgrade it so that the AP cost is reduced by 1, the cooldown is reduced by 1, it could cause bleeding to a target, and you can increase the weapon damage by 15%. This is absolutely fantastic. All of its upgrades are fantastic as well. Definitely recommend you go ahead and pick it up. Next up is Cleave, which we've went over before. It's going to deal 75% weapon damage to every unit in a 3-tile wide area. You can upgrade it where you can increase the weapon damage, you can cause knockback, you can do an additional 20% weapon damage to the center, and you can cause bleeding. I definitely recommend you get bleeding and the damage increase. I personally don't get Severing Blow because it's very situational as far as when you're going to actually have an enemy in the center to take this damage. It's hard to strategize to ensure you're able to do that. You don't have any real control over it. So I would say, for at least me, it doesn't come up enough for me to feel like this point is worth it. And then knockback, it kind of depends upon how you want to use Sir Kay. I personally don't like knockback on my frontline fighters because I want to use them to hold aggro and ensure they're not heading to the back line. But if you don't really care about your champion holding aggro, or even more importantly, you use your champion to roam around the battlefield, it might be useful to have knockback on this or some other skills, because then once you knocked an enemy back, that breaks engagement where they won't take an opportunity attack if you decide you want them to leave that particular enemy and go further in. And the reason why I say this could be useful is there's a lot of enemy spellcasters or just higher level enemies that are buffing the entire enemy party that maybe you want to try to get your champion to, and they can't do it because they're engaged with an enemy. So in that sort of situation, knockback helps. And if that's your playstyle, then do it. Me personally, I always have Lady Guinevere who teleports. So I just teleport to wherever's in the back line that I want to kill, and therefore holding aggro is more important to me. Next up is Rage, which is going to give you a 10% stackable weapon damage for 2 turns after every kill. Definitely want to pick this up and pick up the increase for 1 turn to the effect. The weapon damage increase is nice, but what you really want is the Blood Rage, which is going to allow him to regain 4 HP for each kill while Rage's effect is active. Sir K should constantly be killing enemies, especially with all these weapon attacks that he has. So as long as you position him properly, not only is he going to rip apart enemies, but he's going to steadily increase his hit points while he's doing it as well. Great stuff. The other upgrades will allow him to gain an AP for each kill and increase the weapon damage for Rage. They're both nice to have, but I think the 3 that I mentioned, getting this skill and these 2 upgrades, is what you really need to make sure that you do. Next is Juggernaut. The hero gains 5% cumulative weapon damage for each tile of movement until the end of the turn. Monster skill. Monster skill that you definitely want to pick up for Sir K. Unlike Sir Mordred, he doesn't have a way to just run towards the enemy and automatically do an attack. So 9 times out of 10, if he's going to attack an enemy, he's got to walk to get to them. You can sometimes get an additional 20% weapon damage before you cleave into 3 enemies off of 1 turn. Very effective stuff. Definitely want this in his kit. I've already mentioned you want the extra bleeding. And of course, strength with the extra 10% weapon damage is a no-brainer. Next up is Power Attack, which is going to allow you to do 150% weapon damage to an enemy and do 15% armor breaking. The upgrades are going to reduce the AP cost for this skill, 30% vulnerability on a particular enemy, and it'll increase the weapon damage by 25% if the target unit has full HP and full vitality. You absolutely want this. There are a ton of opportunities for you to be able to attack enemies with full health and full vitality who are also armored, meaning that Death Strike is not going to be particularly effective against them. There is another upgrade that will stun the target, but it's going to increase the AP cost by 1. Me personally, I don't like it. It should be mentioned though that he gets later on a skill called Extra Stun, which will increase the efficiency for your stun and slow effects. And then he also later on, oh no, he doesn't get the one that lets him kill more. But yeah, he can make it where if you do this, you're almost certain to stun whatever enemy it is, which obviously against some creatures can be very helpful. But me personally, I ignore this and don't bother with stun because I wanted to have an AP cost of 4, so he's able to use it more often. Next up is Earthshaker. So it deals 120% weapon damage to chosen unit and everyone along its path. This cannot be blocked. You can upgrade it where it'll have an increased range of 2. It'll do 15% more damage. It can slow everyone that it affects, meaning that their AP cost for movement is doubled, and it can knock back the targets. You absolutely need to have this skill. It's basically the only way for Sir K to attack at a distance. So you see it has a range of 6, meaning that it will go 6 squares down the line and attack all the enemies on it. There are going to be a ton of situations, especially late game, where you can have 3 or 4 enemies all lined up together, especially when they're all trying to attack Sir Mordred. So having this is a monumental benefit to your team. You definitely want the weapon damage increase. You definitely want the range increase. The other two, I'm not really big on. Again, I personally don't use knockback. You all can make your own decision about that. And then I also don't bother with slow. I don't have anybody on my team that really takes advantage of characters having slow, and slowing them down from a tactical standpoint never means much to me. I'm much more about just taking them out. So you can make your own judgment about whether or not it fits into your playstyle. Vengeance. When an enemy hits the hero gains 10% weapon damage against that enemy until the end of the encounter. As far as upgrades, you can gain 2 AP if they have no HP. The hero starts their turn with 1 AP if they received at least 2 hits during the enemy's turn. The less HP the hero has, the more weapon damage the hero deals. And the hero gains 3 unbreakable armor while they have no HP. Now, whether or not this is useful to you probably depends upon what level are you playing and how are you using Sir K. Again, for me, when I use champions, they're roaming around on the outskirts, picking off 1 or 2 enemies at a time. I do not allow my champions to be in situations where they are just mobbed by enemies. So therefore, this doesn't really help me. But if you're the type who plays that way and Sir K is getting hit all the time, then obviously this is really going to be helpful. Specifically this main skill, and then if getting an AP, if they get at least 2 hits, that's very useful. I personally feel like if your character has lost all their HP, that is an extremely bad situation. And from a tactical standpoint, it's not something you should plan around. So I don't like the skills that specifically refer to, hey, if you have no HP, great things happen. However, you might be playing, again, on a difficulty where having no HP is a regular situation, and in that case, these skills are going to help you. Next is Kick. It deals 25% weapon damage to an adjacent enemy and causes knockback. For upgrades, you can reduce the AP cost, increase the damage. It can cause knockdown, but that does increase the AP cost. And you can make it where the kick unit is going to have 1 less AP. So, me personally, obviously, I don't use this. However, again, same conversation we had about knockback before. If you like giving your champions some breathing room so that they can go roam around, this makes sense. It also makes sense if you're comfortable with spending 3 AP to potentially knock down the enemy that you're going up against, which is going to allow Sir K to then step up and do extra damage against them. But again, for me, it's not worth it. Sir K does absolutely fantastic damage all on his own, so I completely ignore all of this. Next up is Armorer. The hero loses 1 less AP from heavy armor sigils. Definitely want to take this. The more AP that Sir K has access to, the better he's going to be. This is well worth it. And then we have Robust, which is going to give him a 10% increase to Vitality, HP, and Physical debuff. That's interesting. I've never seen. So I'm not sure if that's a bug, because it says it's robust the same way defenders and other champions have access to robust, but he has a 10% increase to vitality, HP, and physical debuff resistance. Whereas for all the other ones that I've ever seen, it's only been vitality and HP. So I'm not sure if that's a bug that he has, that additional line, or that's the way that it's meant to be where he can use that. But regardless, either way, I ignore this because, again, I use Sir Mordred to just pull in all the aggro, and the champion should only be dealing with a little bit of heat. So I don't feel like Robust is really worth it for me, but if it's worth it to you, it's available for you to increase. Real quick, before we move on to the last panel, if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate you hitting the like button. It helps me figure out what content the channel is enjoying and helps spread my videos to more people. I really appreciate all of your support. Okay, so now we're on the last section. Next up, we have Whirlwind. Deals 120% weapon damage to adjacent units. You can add bleeding. You can do a knockback. You can reduce AP's cost, the AP cost for Whirlwind by 1, which is going to bring it down to 5. And you can do an additional 15% weapon damage with the talent. So obviously this talent is fantastic if you are allowing Sir K to be mobbed by a bunch of different enemies. Me personally, I am not, and therefore I don't pick this up. Also, I'm not a fan of the huge AP cost of 5. I feel like the better rotation is to use these other abilities that are down at 4, other than this, but this makes sense because you can use it from range. But all the rest of them are at 4 and they're always available, except for Cleave, which has got a little bit of a cooldown. But for the most part, especially since you can reduce cooldowns when killing with strike, you can have these talents available basically every other turn. I'm not particularly a fan of Whirlwind, but again, based on your playstyle, it might make sense. Next up is damage focus. The hero gains 5% weapon damage per unspent AP from the previous turn. You definitely want to go ahead and pick this up, specifically because of the upgrade where AP spent on Overwatch counts as unspent for the purpose of the damage focus skill. So what will happen is, as a champion, you'll walk up and trigger Overwatch because you don't have enough AP to actually get to your opponent, and you're anticipating that this melee opponent is going to step up and come attack you. So you go into Overwatch so that you can attack that opponent once he reaches you. Now, sometimes the enemy reacts in a way that you don't expect, and consequently, that Overwatch attempt is just wasted, and that AP is considered spent. With this skill, the AP is still considered spent, but it counts to give you a temporary buff to the damage that you're able to do. So it's still useful to you. And so I definitely feel like these two together are absolutely worth it. The other upgrades allow you to gain 3 armor per 3 unspent AP left in the previous turn. I definitely say that's worth it. You can gain an additional 3% weapon damage per unspent AP, and you can gain 1 AP per 3 unspent AP left in the previous turn. So honestly, I would say all of these upgrades are worth it, but the ones that you really want are the main skill and the Overwatch upgrade. Next up is melee expertise. While outnumbered, the hero gains 1 unbreakable armor and 5 mental debuff resist and physical debuff resist for each adjacent enemy. I definitely feel like you should pick this up. Not for the main skill, but for the upgrade. When killing a unit, the hero automatically attacks another adjacent enemy with a free strike skill. Now, keep in mind, could be wrong, but from what I've seen thus far, I think this is bugged. It says free strike skill, but when it's triggered for me, I swear I felt like the AP was spent. So I think this needs to be patched, but regardless, it's really cool to watch, and once they patch it, it's going to be really powerful. Sir K is the character on your team who should absolutely be killing enemies all the time. So this should trigger all the time. Very good stuff. The other upgrades allow him, when he's outnumbered, to gain 5% weapon damage for each adjacent enemy. He starts his turn with +1 AP for each adjacent enemy above 2. And all cooldowns are reduced by 1 turn if the hero starts their turn outnumbered. So again, I don't use Sir K in a way where he should be getting outnumbered, but if you're okay with a little bit of extra heat on him, all of this is going to be well worth it. If you don't, then I would say just the main skill in that upgrade is going to be worth it to you. Preparedness. The hero consumes all remaining AP. Until their next turn, they gain a counterattack per 2 AP consumed. So this is obviously fantastic in those situations where you're facing a ton of melee opponents and you know they're about to swarm you. You can trigger this and have Sir K ready to dish out punishment for anyone who tries to come towards him. As far as upgrades, you can make it where it's going to grant +4 armor against incoming attacks that you can counterattack. So I read this to mean that he's not going to get that +4 armor against ranged attacks, only melee. The cooldown for this time is reduced by 1 turn, 15% additional weapon damage for the counterattacks, and preparedness is also going to reduce incoming damage by 20% while the hero has unspent counterattacks left. So all this together, again, I feel like it's kind of situational, but when that situation comes up, you'd be really, really glad to have this skill and all of his upgrades. And honestly, I'd say, especially late game, level 17 through 20, the situations where you would want that skill are going to happen all the time. So, yeah, definitely nice for him to have in his kit. We've already talked about extra stun. It's going to give you increased efficiency for stun and slow effects. Hardened armor, reduce armor loss by 20%. I would definitely say you should pick this up. As you can see, he doesn't get like a guard skill or one of those one-off skills where it's going to give you a brief increase in armor and hit points. And just overall, I'd say Sir K is less tanky than some of your other champion options. So this is going to help toughen him up some. And then extra area damage, an additional 20% weapon damage for every skill that deals damage in an area. I would definitely recommend that you pick this up. Obviously, I recommend that you get Earthshaker and Cleave, which is going to trigger for. And if you decide to get Whirlwind, it's going to work for that as well. And that is all of the abilities available for Sir K. So I will point out that even though he gets this talented trait, which is going to make it easier for you to spend skill points, he does get a lot of active weapon skills. And so you might want to take a step back and consider, do you actually need all of those skills, or will some of those points be better spent elsewhere? If you were going to let go of one of them, I would say that Strike does really good damage to unarmed opponents anyway. So you don't necessarily need Death Strike. It's really nice. It does great damage, but it's got a cooldown. I've never been disappointed with the damage that Strike does. So there's probably a case that you don't really need this, or you can make a decision about some of the other ones based upon the team makeup that you have. But I just want you to keep in mind, again, there are some powers here that are not active, but are still really, really good for him to get. And it's going to take a long time for you to fill it out and get them if you're putting all of your points into your active weapon skills. So just something to keep in mind. Hope all of you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a like, share this content, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will see you all in the next video. Take care.